अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानं पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna, we're very honored to be part of this very important ceremony discussing the glories of the Vaikuntha children. And as I was preparing to come over here, I realized that, as Shivara Maharaj mentioned, this used to be the Gurukul. And I lived here for many years, 1988 to 2002 or so, and slept right here, right there, right there, right there, right there, different houses that used to be here. The whole Gurukul complex was here. And I believe where we were sitting right now was the library. So I was very fortunate to be a part of that educational system for many years, and really made a great deep impression on my Krishna consciousness. And therefore I feel it's very fitting to have this this program at this location, where so much transcendental knowledge was exchanged for so many years in this very holy part of Sridham Mayapur. One interesting incident from those days, perhaps the early 90s, without getting too much into the history, but there was one devotee, senior Prabhupada disciple, who was campaigning at that time. I think it was during the GBC meeting time. He was campaigning that due to issues of gurus having trouble and disciples being confused, he was pushing for there should be a moratorium on initiations for some time, till we figure out what is the qualification of guru, how we can protect the disciples from losing faith, various other important issues. So this was his proposal, that just stop initiations for some time, 6 months or so, until things, and give some energy to sorting out these issues of Guru Tattva, and then recommence. So I remember I was overhearing a talk by Hridayananda Maharaj on this subject, and he had actually had a discussion with Bhaktivedanta Purna Maharaj, who was the principal of the Gurukul at the time, and therefore he was my direct teacher. And Maharaj referred to the verse in Bhagavatam, the 5th canto, from Maharaj Rishabhdev's teaching. Guru na sasyat, svajano na sasyat, pita na sasyat, janani na sasyat. Daivam na tatsyan na patischa sasyan namochi yadya samupayat mrityum. So this is a very famous verse, and describing that one should not become a spiritual master unless one can deliver one's disciples. So on the strength of that verse, you could say that one shouldn't become a guru unless he's really qualified. But Bhaktivedanta Purna Maharaj had pointed out to Hridayananda Maharaj that the verse doesn't just say guru. It says mother and father also. So one also shouldn't become a parent unless one is able to deliver one's children, which seems like a very tall order, very grave responsibility. So if we're pushing for stopping of initiations, then we should also have a break from having children. We should, ISKCON-wide, there should be a ban, no children, until we can sort out what is proper Krishna conscious parenting, why some children are not taking up Krishna consciousness as we would like them to, as the parents especially would like them to. So if you're going to target the guru, you should also look into this, why the parents and children are not becoming as Krishna conscious as we would like. So this really gives some emphasis to the responsibility of the parents in Krishna consciousness. As Prabhupada so many times said, people are having children all over the world, but he basically would compare them to cats and dogs. What is the use of having more cats and dogs in the world. They're simply bickering and fighting, covered over by tamagun, rajagun. And in that way, the whole population is simply, becoming more and more disturbed, more and more conflict in the world. Radha Prabhupada wanted to show example of sattvic, brahminical devotees and children who can actually give an example how to live within this world but be above it, which is not always easy when we're living surrounded by so much Maya in so many different forms. But that is the responsibility of the parents. And therefore, before anyone wants to have a child, then they have to really consider these questions very deeply. How much responsibility the parent has to be willing to undergo. Because in one sense, although when the children are younger, we have more control. And as they grow up, become teenagers and beyond, then really the parents' role, in one sense, takes a step back because they're not obliged to listen to us anymore. They may not be dependent on us anymore for their, day-to-day needs. The children grow up, they move out, they start their own families. And so how much control can we really have, especially later on when they get older, to take that responsibility seriously that these children are my responsibility to take back to Godhead. So that is a big question. Once someone takes up his own independent life, makes his own decisions, they may take to Krishna consciousness very seriously. They may wander for some time and come back. They may stay on the periphery, or they may, if they're swept away by Maya, may take a long break. And we may have limited control over their choices at that stage of life. But then at least in the early days, we have to give our best shot at giving them Krishna consciousness. And so this starts long before the children are born. You will be hearing more about the samskaras from other speakers. The samskaras are very dear to my wife and I because this is something that we took up very shortly after we got married. My training in the Gurukul, we had a lot of training in Brahminical culture. But after we got married, then really the samskaras, especially for raising children, became very real to us when we wanted to start a family. So the point is that the samskaras create a favorable, purified atmosphere, so a certain quality of soul is attracted to that family. Right in Bhagavad Gita, we see this principle when Krishna says that the pious souls, they go to enjoy for many years in the planets of the demigods, and they take birth in pious families or in the families of devotees. Shuchinam Shrimatam Gehe Yoga Prashto Vijayate. So those who make more advancement in their more spiritual advancement, they'll take birth in a devotee family. So in one sense, the raising of children is giving an opportunity for devotees in their previous life who haven't been able to complete their Krishna consciousness, and they have to complete it in this life. So that's one very important aspect. It's not something selfish that we want to have children, but actually the service is we're giving an opportunity for a devotee who wasn't able to perfect himself or herself in his previous life, and they need to continue. Therefore, they have to take birth in a devotee family. So if the devotees are not having children, where will these souls take birth? So it's a very great opportunity to give that chance to them to continue their Krishna consciousness. And therefore, we see so many of the children, they are so naturally Krishna conscious, even from a very young age. And that can be encouraged even during pregnancy and in their very early years by exposing them to maximum amount of Krishna consciousness. So therefore, we have to really take this seriously, that how we can give Krishna consciousness to our children and make it attractive to them, that it's not something we force on them or push them to do, but make it so attractive and pleasing that they just feel very naturally inclined. Krishna is all attractive. The very definition of Krishna is the all attractive one. So we're very fortunate that everything about Krishna consciousness is so attractive that especially those personalities who were devotees from their previous life, they're naturally attracted to Krishna, and we just have to kind of not get in the way. Let their natural attraction to Krishna be developed more and more. Another meaning of samskara is impression, a mental impression. And those of us who join Krishna consciousness later, we know how various incidents in our lives, various activities we may have indulged in, which are contrary to Krishna consciousness, those impressions are still there. And they stay there for the whole life, basically. At any time, those memories, those attractions can haunt us and disturb us in our Krishna consciousness. So therefore also, we don't want to allow those impressions to also affect our children. And therefore, the whole culture of TV and, video games and karmi books and all these things which may seem innocent at a certain level, but these are all simply ultimately giving negative impressions in the mind. And that's actually a disservice to these children who are coming from devotional background in their previous life, and they're taking birth to finish that process. And by exposing them or indulging in these distractions, mundane distractions, we are creating those impressions in their mind, which can stay there for many, many years, many, many lifetimes even. So therefore, we have to be very careful and conscious. Similarly, just like we are regretful that we had exposure to sinful activities prior to coming to Krishna consciousness. In the same way, we don't want to make the same mistake that even in a devotee family, we indulge in these things for whatever expedient reasons. And simultaneously, we are giving these bad impressions to our children. And that is only going to detract from their journey, their spiritual journey back to Krishna. So these are a few thoughts I had in this subject. In our own personal experience, we feel like raising children is such a great responsibility, but it's also such a great opportunity for being steady in Krishna consciousness. Sometimes people think that having children is going to be a distraction from Krishna consciousness, but if you're training your child in Krishna consciousness, then actually it's just reinforcing that now we have responsibility for another soul. We have to make sure they get maximum exposure to Krishna consciousness, taking to the temple all the time, regularly, associate with, senior Vaishnavas, prasadam, the whole Krishna conscious package. It's not just we have to worry about ourselves, but now we have to give that experience to the children. And therefore, that strengthens our own sadhana, our own faith in the process, and our own performance in Krishna consciousness. Finally, I'd also like to mention that, just as most of us here, we came to Krishna consciousness later in life, including me. I was 11 when I first started going to Gurukul in Australia. And it's not a, sometimes devotees say, I wish we had that opportunity when we were young. We could have gone to Gurukul. It would have been so nice. But Krishna consciousness is not limited by such considerations. And so many devotees, without any prior exposure to Krishna consciousness, having done all sorts of things, by taking to Krishna consciousness seriously, then very quickly get purified. So, it's not to be undermined, the power of Krishna consciousness, to simply by engaging in the major processes of bhakti, that one can make very rapid advancement. But for when one wants to have a child in one's family, then naturally you want to invest the best effort. So you attract a soul who is going to be much more devotionally inclined. So in that way, your work is much less in one sense. It's not as big a task. If the child was already X amount Krishna consciousness in the previous life, and by your prayers, by your performance of the samskara, you've attracted that soul to your family, then you can be very sure that his Krishna consciousness is at a level that your job is not as cut out. Whereas if one conceives a child in the wrong consciousness, then one is going to get a very conflicted soul who is going to be a real handful. So in one sense, I like to call it as an investment. If you invest your time to prepare and conceive the child in the right consciousness, then you get the returns by having a child who is going to be much more sattvic and easier to raise and much more likely to, be much more conducive, much more smooth in accepting Krishna consciousness. So, this is an important point, especially for those who are entering Grihastha ashram or planning to have children. We teach course on this in much more detail, and we'll be happy to share with you, those, especially those in that category, how to prepare properly for having a child, so you can attract someone who's already of quite a elevated stage of Krishna consciousness from the previous life. So anyone interested, you can free to approach us afterwards, and we can talk a little more about this topic. In the meantime, I'd like to hear from Radha Sundari.
Hare Krishna. I was just remembering that when we first decided in consultation with our Shiksha gurus and mentors that we were prepared to try to start a family, I approached Radha Madhava with the intention to pray that they would allow us, accept us as instruments to bring one of their devotees into this world. But when I got there in front of them, I felt really silly. It seemed like a ludicrous idea that I would ask the Lord to send into my care his most prized possession. We know that there's nothing more dear to Krishna than his devotees. So how could I say to Krishna, please send me that which is most dear to you? So instead, I compromised a little, and I promised Radha Madhava, if you send a devotee, I will do everything in my power. We will do everything in our power to ensure that that soul always has good association. That was also silly because the association of advanced souls can't be demanded. But I realized since, through that experience in the last 9 years, that Krishna is just looking for our sincere desire. Krishna, when he sees a sincere intent to serve, he provides. He facilitates that desire. The real challenge comes, however, when the children do appear, when Krishna sends those children. Because when we have children, as parents, we often start to see them as our property, as our creations, as an extension of ourselves. But they're not. They're the property of Krishna that has been sent into our care. And it's a blessing and an honor to be able to serve them. Young couples often approach us with the concern that if they have children, it will become an impediment in their service or in the progress of their Krishna consciousness. But as my husband was saying, our experience has been the opposite. Because devotee children demand you to be Krishna conscious all the time. I remember our son Raj Mohan, who just came in with the Gurukul, when he was about a year old, he went through a phase where he wanted to hear the recording of the Govindam prayers 24 hours a day, over and over again. And by the third day, my husband turned to me and said, I think Raj Mohan is the most Krishna conscious person I know, and it's so annoying. Because we couldn't have conversations. We could do nothing but listen to Govindam again and again and again. But that's what children do. They demand kirtan and chanting and dancing and stories about Krishna and Lord Chaitanya and the devotees and prasadam, and they want to reenact all the exciting things they see in the temple. They want to do artis, they want to dress the deities, they want to cook pretend feasts, they want to serve those feasts all day long. And it's wonderful, it's exciting, and it's a lot of fun, and it's uplifting. But that doesn't mean that it's easy. It can be very difficult. And often parents can be tempted in those difficult times to take that child and put them in front of a television or in front of a computer so they can have a few minutes to breathe. But that's actually a disservice not only to the child, but also to the parents. Because for those few minutes that we may be able to relax, in turn, we take away our children's attention spans, we take away their imagination, their creativity, and then they want to be entertained all the time. But if we teach them how to engage constructively in the process of Krishna consciousness, which is so joyful and exciting, then they learn how to really engage themselves in a way that's beneficial and uplifting to them and to all of us. And it's a great blessing to have those children. It's a great blessing for us to be able to engage with them in that process. And in ISKCON, we're so fortunate because we're not alone in engaging them. Our children are born into an extended, sometimes globally extended family. And I can say with very firm conviction that if it wasn't for that extended family, I wouldn't even be attempting to engage in something that somewhat resembles Krishna consciousness. I was very fortunate because I had loving and caring and responsible parents who, along with raising us, always made a very strong effort to serve the devotees and particularly to invite them into our home. So as a result, my brother and I were blessed with so many wonderful relationships. And of those relationships, the one that impacted me the most was with a devotee named Ladini Devi. Many of you have heard her name. She's a well-known disciple of Srila Prabhupada. At that time, she was a pujari in New Vrindavan. And Ladini Devi, despite the fact that she was a very senior devotee, engaged in so much service, would keep me with her 24 hours a day whenever she could. And whenever my parents would allow, she would take me on the altar with her to dress the deities, to cook in the kitchen, to chant japa, to the temple program, to read shastra, to meet with other devotees. And it really made me feel not only engaged, but a part of the process of Krishna consciousness and a part of her life. And in particular, I have one very poignant memory of a phone call with her from when I was about 9 years old. And we had missed the Sunday feast the previous day. And she called the next day and said to 9-year-old me, "Did you hear? There was almost a big disaster in the temple yesterday." And my ears perked up. She said, "Gaur Nitai refused to give darshan. They said that if they can't wear the garlands that you've made, they're not giving darshan. And we thought we have to cancel the whole program and send everyone home. But finally, after I begged and pleaded, they agreed that just this one time, they would give darshan without your garlands." And I felt such a sense of responsibility. And after that, my parents knew that if they ever wanted me to do anything, all they had to do was threaten that I couldn't go to the temple and I would comply with whatever they wanted. But more than that, I felt really wanted, and I felt really needed. And in the material world, that's what we're all looking for. We want to be loved, we want to be wanted, we want to be needed. And that's what our children are looking for. The only thing our children want is our attention. They don't want anything else. And when a child sees that they're needed, that they're cherished, that they're loved, that they're respected, they become so happy and secure. And when those children see that their loving, affectionate parents are sincerely and joyfully dedicated to serving Krishna and the devotees, they make the connection that my parents are so loving and kind. Krishna and the devotees must also be equally loving and kind if they want to serve them so much. And thereby they're able to continue their relationship with Krishna from where they've left off. But at the same time, if we put even our services in our own spiritual life before our children, if we see our children as a distraction, if we see them as an impediment, they immediately recognize that, as Devaki Mataji was mentioning. And then Krishna becomes a competitor for the one thing they want more than anything, the attention of their parents. And then it becomes very difficult for them to establish that relationship. And any other service that we may have been given in this life, we're dispensable. Anyone else can make the garlands. Anyone else can cook the feast. Someone else can manage the temple. Someone else can give the lecture. But no one else can raise our children. That's the one service that Krishna has directly given to us. He has sent us those children so that we can care for them. And as my husband said, not get in their way. An astrologer said to us when our son was born, all I can say to you is don't get in his way. Let him complete his mission. And these children have come with a mission. They've come to love Krishna, to contribute something to Srila Prabhupada's mission, whatever it may be. And our service is simply to love them and engage them and not to get in their way.